ACR Bulletin Podcast, the show where we examine the latest trends affecting radiology. I'm your host, Chris Hobson, and today we'll be talking with Summer Kaplan, MD, MS. Dr. Kaplan is director of the section of Emergency Radiology's Division of Body Imaging and is also the director of Point of Care Ultrasound at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, or as it's more commonly known, CHOP. In addition, she serves as assistant professor of clinical radiology at the Perelman School of Medicine at the University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Kaplan, it's a pleasure speaking with you today.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for the invitation. I'm really happy to speak with you today and your audience. So I'll be talking about some of the things we've done here at CHOP. Just a disclaimer, these are not necessarily the views of my employer, although I will be discussing the program that we run here at CHOP.
Absolutely. Well, we really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today. And today, we're really going to be discussing how cost estimation tools can help facilitate price transparency for radiology patients, first and foremost. But before we get into your personal experience, because I know you do have a substantial amount of experience with this in your day-to-day work, can you please tell us a little, give us a better understanding of first what price transparency is, and second, why it's currently such an issue in radiology?
Sure. So price transparency is kind of the novel idea that we should know what the cost of a service is before we contract for it. And so that's kind of commonly expected pretty much everywhere in our lives outside of medicine. But in the healthcare system, it's really challenging to know what the price of a service is going to be in advance. So price transparency is the idea that the prices in healthcare should be available, should be accurate, so that patients can make more informed decisions. And this is especially true that in radiology, we need to pay attention to price transparency. There are legal reasons, there are legislations being passed and has been passed to make sure that patients are as informed as possible when they're making their healthcare decisions. So as a field, all of medicine is paying attention to this. But particularly for us in radiology, we're a higher price service, so there's some pressure from payers for people to shop around for our services. So prices are out there. So it's important for us to pay attention and make sure that they're accurate. And another thing that's maybe a little bit unique to radiology is that we don't tend to have long-term patient relationships. So we really rely on our referrals and on people's choice of where to go. So making sure people make those choices based on accurate information, which can be hard to find in pricing, in value. It's really difficult out there for patients to find good information.
Yeah, and speaking of the patient's choice, we'll get into that in a little bit further on in our discussion. But before we get too far, I can imagine some listeners already are thinking about, wait a second, I know what a hospital charge master is. It's a hospital price list that is usually now even more so than before widely available, and that seems transparent. And they've been widely available since 2019. So why can't I just go to that list, figure out what the price of an imaging procedure is, say, in my local wherever I usually consume healthcare, and why can't I just get an accurate idea of that? I guess, and the second part of that is taking into account how insurance plays into all of this. Why can't people simply, find out the cost of a given procedure by, again, looking at that hospital charge master price list?
Yeah, so the legislation that made charge masters publicly available in 2019 sort of had the goal of price transparency. But I don't know if you've ever looked at a charge master. It's basically a shopping list for a hospital of many, many different items. And there's honestly no way for a person shopping around for healthcare to know what service they need exactly. You may think but do you need a CT head with temporal bones? Do you need IV contrast? Is there separate charges for the syringes, for the contrast material? There's the charge masters are really itemized. And so I think it's difficult for patients to even know what to look for in the charge master. That's one issue. Another issue is that the charge masters are really a price list the hospital generates kind of as a starting point for discussion of an end price. So they're rarely the price that anybody's actually going to pay. The only people who end up sometimes paying those prices are unfortunately the uninsured. And they're not really the price that is commonly paid by people with insurance. So the price list, the charge master, is kind of a starting point for discussion with insurers who are ultimately going to be paying these bills for the most part. So you may see a price on the charge master, but the price that your insurance has contracted might actually be very different than that listed price. And those contracted prices that insurers manage or achieve are proprietary and are not publicly available. So you really don't know what your insurance would actually be charged for any of these services on the charge master. And the other big part of this puzzle is that a lot of us don't actually care what our insurance is paying. We care what we're paying.
Right. That's a good point.
So it depends on your individual insurance plan and where you are in your benefits year. So this has become more and more of an issue as people are choosing these high deductible health insurance plans where the deductible annually might be $5,000 or even more. And so these plans are meant to encourage people to be responsible and shop around for healthcare. But in reality, it's just so challenging to shop for healthcare that the ultimate result of these high deductible plans has often been that people just don't get care. So having accurate prices available that people will pay themselves is an important part of helping people get the care that they need.
Right. And I think the context you're portraying there is like somebody who has the leisure to even do that. I mean, a lot of these are just emergent situations where they're just going to go to the first place they can find to get care. So just it's important to probably contextualize that. But yeah, I don't want to put words in your mouth. Is that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. So it's a difficult situation for a patient, or in our case, since we're a children's hospital, really it's the families who are making the decision for the patients. Right. There's a lack of information about pricing. There's really no way for people to understand the quality of the care that they're purchasing. So people use price kind of as a proxy for quality, and it's really not a good proxy for quality. People are making these decisions at a very stressful time in their life. So there's the time issue, right? It takes a long time to shop around and make all these phone calls to understand your insurance package and all that. And if you're sick, who has the mental energy to do that?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. You talked a little bit already about the deductibles and kind of planning your time around when you actually get care, and that's something we'll touch on in a few minutes. But if we could just stay on the topic of barriers to price transparency for another minute, some people in our audience might be familiar with the term financial toxicity, which broadly kind of describes the devastating effects medical bills can have on a patient's well-being, and which may in some instances even outweigh the benefits of receiving medical care at all for some people. So can you please say a little bit about how a lack of price transparency can lead to financial toxicity in some situations?
Sure. Yeah. Financial toxicity is a really important concept that has become, I think, more widely recognized in recent years, especially as people are bearing more of their costs themselves. And so it's exactly as you said, it's the idea that we provide medical service to make people healthier, keep them healthy, but there can be a financial fallout to the cost of those services. And there's a lot of information about how poverty and financial stress affects people's mental and physical health. So there's actually a real downside, both financially and medically, to kind of disregarding the financial implications of care that patients and families are going to bear. So that's kind of the idea of financial toxicity, is that healthcare can have this dark side of creating additional stress that leads to problems. And so price transparency is one of the ways to alleviate that as much as possible. So surprise bills are a source of major stress for people when they think they've finished paying for their care and then another huge bill arrives, or bills that are too high. That puts a lot of stress on family budgets and can cause them to make choices between paying their medical bills and paying, for medicine, or paying for other things. So that's where price transparency can help people understand what's coming and kind of plan in advance for when they want their services.
Well, let's turn to a solution that some institutions across the country, including your hospital, CHOP, have taken up to help patients better plan, as you just mentioned, for their procedures from a financial perspective ahead of time. So please tell us about the role that benefit specialists play in your practice.
Sure. So benefit specialists are really a part of most practices that bill, which is pretty much all of us. So the benefit specialists help integrate the billing and the insurance, and they also answer patient and family questions if there's any confusion on a bill, or if a bill is not being paid. They would be sort of the interface with the patient or the family to help them understand the bill. So that's a specific expertise that practices generally do have already, and they sometimes are patient facing, but typically it's not in a great situation. Usually it's like after the fact, after service has been rendered and a bill is, can't be paid or something like that.
Mm-hmm. And so often, I don't want to get in the weeds on this, but so often now they're, like you mentioned earlier, surprise billing, where maybe a patient didn't even realize they were out of network. It could be at the same hospital system, assuming that everything is covered when it's not. So, but that's we actually did a separate price transparency podcast not too long ago where we touched on that. Maybe we'll link to it in the show notes, but yeah, thank you for that very succinct explanation. That's really helpful. So what does it look like so I'm interested in what that looks like in practice, because I think most people, even when they go to get care, they don't see that part of it. They don't see like you said, if they see it at all, it's maybe on the back end, the benefits management kind of part of it. So what does it look like in your practice in real life to move benefit specialists to the front lines? And, I'm not even sure, does the workflow differ in a significant way? And maybe does the patient see that? Or if you could just paint a picture.
Yeah, sure. It differs a little bit. So we've put these benefit specialists on the front lines where they're involved before care is rendered, and they help to explain to patients and families what they can expect their bills to look like. So it's it's a change in the workflow for the benefit specialist, but also for the families who are coming for care, patients who are coming for care. And so there's a couple of ways that we contact patients, or they contact us. One would be sort of proactively, our benefit specialists may be reaching out to families in advance if they schedule an exam, especially if it's an exam that has, that may have a high price on the charge master that might scare people, or if there's a lot of variability between insurance coverages. We might reach out to them proactively and ask them if they'd like a cost estimate, which for the most part they do, and they're really happy to have that contact. The other way people can find the cost specialists is to contact them through the electronic medical record. If they're already patients in our system, they can contact them that way. And aside from that, anybody can contact them through our public facing website. So there's a link for the cost estimation department. People could request an estimate. And the thing that's nice about these estimates is that it's personalized for that individual's exam that's going to be performed, or office visit, because this is a hospital-wide system. It's not just for radiology. So for the service that's going to be rendered, and it takes into account their insurance, and can even take into account where they are in their benefits year, how much of their deductible is left. And so our specialists can help people sort of work with that and any limitations they might have in terms of their personal finances, as far as planning services, planning payment schedules if needed, to put that all up front and make it, as you said, transparent. It should be a transparent process so people aren't surprised by their bills.
Well, and I'm wondering, I suppose most specialties or primary care doctors could probably employ the same approach, but what is it about radiology that makes it well positioned to employ this type of approach?
Well, I think radiology is a little bit unique in healthcare services in that our prices don't vary that much. So people are generally coming in for an exam, and there's not a lot of variability. When you come in for a CT or an X-ray, you'll get that service, and there aren't a lot of add-ons, which is a little bit simpler of a model than compared to an outpatient visit, where the billing may vary depending on the services rendered, tests ordered, things like that. So that puts radiology in a position to be a good kind of test subject for this the system and how well does it work, how accurate are we in our estimates, and how much does it help patients.
Well, that's so interesting, and that actually makes total sense. I hadn't thought about it that way, but thank you for clarifying that. Well, I have also read that you believe that moving benefit specialists to the front lines has helped your practice acquire market share there in the Philadelphia market. And I guess I'd be interested in your thoughts on that. And also relatedly, your practice has also seen revenue losses for exams decrease by threefold in the first year of service. So, all the way up to sevenfold in recent years. And you may even have more recent data than that. I'm not sure. But so please give our audience an idea, basically A, how you feel that you've gained market share, and B, how moving those benefit specialists to the front lines has helped you actually enhance the bottom line.
Sure. I mean, so as you mentioned, we're in a market in Philadelphia where patients have a lot of options for their imaging care or for their care in general. And so providing cost estimates is an additional service that we offer, so that can attract patients to our practice because they're able to know in advance what their costs are, and that other places in the area may have that as well, and if not, they may be developing it. But it's something that is a service we provide that is of value to patients. So that potentially would increase our market share. I don't think we've actually been tracking its effect on market share, but potentially it could be. But what we have looked at is the revenue losses, how it's affected people who come for service and then aren't able to pay their bill or able to pay it in full. And in some cases, we end up writing that off as a loss. And so that's what we've actually seen change with the cost estimation service, is that there are fewer people who are not able to pay their bill because they know in advance what to expect. So that's been great as far as decreasing our losses.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I don't know if you have looked into this either, but do you guys see, even anecdotally, is it word of mouth, or is it really people just, stumbling on this service, or because they're probably fairly highly, educated and looking and really trying to plan out the best way forward for their own healthcare, or what is it, a mix maybe, or?
It's a mix, yeah. So some people, reach out to them proactively with phone calls to make sure that they understand what the cost would be. There's a tool that people can use in the electronic medical record, and so I think a lot of times that request happens at scheduling, or as people are looking into scheduling services.
Well, I feel like maybe some people in our audience right now, they feel like maybe this, although they think it's very patient-centered and also good for the bottom line, they might be getting the idea that it's a heavy lift, that like just structurally it might just be a lot to ask, and a lot of workflow changes and things like that. So what would you say to people who might feel like a little resistance from that front?
I mean, I think like any new initiative, it takes some organization, some higher level organization to make it happen. But the impact on the practice, the expense to the practice to setting it up is really minimal, because we're taking employees we already have in the benefits specialist pool and just moving them to a different place in the patient encounter. So it doesn't actually even require additional hiring. We have now hired more people because it's become such a growing service, but the initial setup didn't really require much in terms of cost to set up. So it's been a win-win so far.
6 wins. Wow, that's
6 wins. Everybody wins.
Sevenfold increase in revenue, so that's good. No, but I guess did you maybe even anecdotally did you encounter any resistance, or was this like a light bulb went off and everyone just kind of got it right off the bat? And
I think that it's a new and an innovative service, so I don't think there were simultaneous light bulbs. Hopefully there were many light bulbs, but I don't think everybody embraced it right at first, because change is always hard. But there are so many upsides to it, including some of the ones that we've discussed here. And so I think that there are a few downsides, and with the additional kind of pressure on medical providers to increase their price transparency, I think it's a great service for patients, which is ultimately what we're trying to do.
Mhm.
And, I think it's just a service that needs to grow. So there hasn't really been any real downfalls or resistance, large scale resistance to changing the practice.
That's interesting, because that always feels like the first hurdle is just convincing people that it's a good idea. So that's good that it sounds like by and large people got it. So that's great. So I guess if we zoom in, you mentioned patient-centered care. If we could zoom in on patients for a minute, who are maybe even on a fixed income, how does your unique approach help them in particular?
It's especially helpful for people who are on a fixed income because it allows them to budget for their healthcare expenses. And that would include things like making a payment plan if it's going to be more than they can pay at once, or scheduling services to coincide with maybe the end of a benefits year when they've used their deductible, and so they can come get services that might be more expensive once their deductible's already been spent. And thinking about our patients who are kids, the families are often budgeting around other predictable expenses like sports or clubs or school events. So for families who are on a fixed budget, it can help them schedule around known costs that they might have.
It's very interesting.
Otherwise.
Absolutely. Well, we've talked so much about the past and the present, but what do you think of the future of the cost estimation program? Now, how do you see it evolving over the next, say, 5 to 10 years, if you've thought that far ahead?
Sure. I mean, the goal is always to grow the service. It's been really successful and has been really appreciated by our patients and families. So growing the service, meaning providing estimates for more and more of our services. We're constantly adding new services that we can provide estimates for, making sure that the estimates are as accurate as possible. We never want to, provide this service and then surprise people with bills on top of that.
Right.
And I will say that the other thing this service provides and has helped with is really establishing communication with patients and families. So it gives them a point of contact with billing, and it lets them know that we actually do recognize this is something that's important to families and important to their health. So keeping those lines of communication open, making sure our estimates are accurate, automating it, making it as fast and easy as possible. That's really where we'd like to go in the future.
That's really interesting. Well, I should say that you all have written about this quite extensively. You've co-authored a paper about your experience, was featured in the JACR, which we'll link to in the show notes. And you've also authored a blog post about this subject for the ACR. Again, we'll link to that in the show notes, and we'll probably come to you in the future and get an update, and hopefully you'll write again for us. But I would just really like to thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure speaking with you. If people want to continue this really important discussion online, is there a really good place for them to contact you?
Sure. I'm on Twitter. It's at SL Kaplan MD.
Okay. Yeah. And we'll include that as a graphic below you. So as we talk, so hopefully people will reach out. And for our viewers, if you have any ideas for future show topics, we're always looking for new topics. So please let us know on Twitter at Radiology ACR. And please do use the hashtag ACR Bulletin Podcast. I also invite you to check out all of our past episodes at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and please be sure to subscribe to ACR's YouTube channel to see all our latest episodes. But thank you so much again, Dr. Kaplan. This has been a real pleasure, and I actually learned a lot today. I think our audience did too. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Chris. And thanks to the ACR for keeping this podcast running. I listened to the old episodes too, and they're really great.
Oh,
it's
great.
Really great content that people don't really get in medical school or in residency. So thanks for doing this.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. And thank you so much to our listeners. This has been the ACR Bulletin Podcast. See you next time.